afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Propagandacast Addendum with me, your host, Imperial Dane. Master Propaganda here to talk to you about improving, I think, tank combat in a future Companies game. I mean, some of these changes could probably apply to Companies too, but how likely they are to be applied, I'm not so sure. But I mean, there are certainly some things that feel like Companies 2, in terms of tank combat, did less well than Companies 1 in part. Companies 1, I feel, sort of rewarded flanking more than did Companies 2, because in part, well, front line was just a lot more worth it than it was in Companies 2. In many cases, the front line, particularly the German tanks, have been rendered so little worth it. I mean, even your early access anti-tank can easily penetrate even the front line of the Panther or the Tiger, which rather devaluates it actually a lot, and thusly also creates less incentive for actually flanking in part because there's no reward for flanking. I mean, there's no extra damage or anything at all. And that's definitely one thing I'd probably look into, just applying some kind of bonus if you actually flank the bloody enemy tank. I'd also increase the front line of the tanks overall in general, but I'd also then add sidearm, which I was thinking they considered in Companies 2, but apparently didn't, because it will make defending more difficult apparently, except that's not what tanks are good for. They're good for attacking. Plus, I mean, it would probably solve a lot of issues long term, and also allow them to then do better frontal armor, which again I think would have been much better for a lot of reasons down the road. So I mean, just for there again, I just make frontal armor in most cases a lot more bloody worth it than it is currently now, which I think is a really big shame. Again, it sort of really undercuts a lot of the German late game when, well, any anti-tank gun can easily penetrate in most cases. It's like you put in a lot of fuel manpower for that tank, and a bit on manpower, and it's just gone. It doesn't feel good. It feels pretty tiresome, and again, it also just creates these further just blob tactics, incentivizes just going head on, no maneuver, and no nothing. So that's really something that like to see Companies 3 and also look into more incentives for that. And again, giving side armor, giving bonus effective flanking, maybe like a 15% damage penalty for just hitting the side armor, rear armor maybe a 20%, 25%, sort of like that. But again, overall in some ways increasing armor here and then, of course, making frontal armor overall much tougher. I think that would, for starters, just do a lot more than in tank combat. Another thing I look into is just the whole snare things. A nice idea, but the problem is in many cases just too easily applied, and again, particularly in the later stuff, which further just does not incentivize you to being aggressive or flanking, because you just get easily panzerfausted and that's it, or anti-tank grenaded or whatever. Like, I think there needs to be sort of a slightly higher threshold needed for it to actually happen, like maybe sort of like close to 50% health before it can actually suffer damage engine from that, because as it currently stands, I think it just ends up being rather too easy when it comes to tanks, and just further, it doesn't really create any incentive for flanking or maneuvering. Again, if it just is so easy disabled, it just forces you to be more cautious, defensive, just bunching out a bunch of tanks and throwing them at the enemy. Again, it just creates less room for tactical maneuver and less incentive for maneuvering, which I would say is rather not desirable, at least from my perspective. So making snares just a bit harder to get that engine damage, I think would do a lot of good. Maybe instead apply some kind of temporary debuff to the tank instead of just the more reparations necessary engine damage or light. Maybe the crew gets stunned or blinded or shocked, or maybe there's a sort of temporary damage, like temporary turret jam or something like that, or the engine suffers some kind of trouble, but that is not something that needs to be repaired. I mean, things like that could probably go a long way to just making tank combat again more exciting. It also feels less punishable for the attacker, because in many ways you can easily be punished as the attacker, whereas again, there's not really a lot of rewards for attacking, doing anything really clever with the tanks increasingly. So I mean, again, I'd sort of look into just improving that aspect of the game. Also, more abilities that could do something offensively, I think, for the tanks would also be great. Less smoke, more I don't know, increased rate of fire abilities, or just bigger splash damage, or something like that. Something in further incentivize you actually being aggressive, more like the old school blitzkrieg from the blitzkrieg doctrine, which actually boosted speed and rate of fire of your tanks, making them a lot more lethal on the move. I mean, those are the sort of things I want to see personally. Of course, I mean, you feel free to disagree with that, but I feel that would also do a lot more good towards making tank combat more exciting, if there are also more exciting abilities for being on the attack and not just sitting about there waiting for the enemy to do something. So that's sort of another sort of thing I'd like to see that could personally think do more for just making the game a bit more interesting in the tank combat arena. You know, add some more heft, some more feeling, some more gravity to the proceedings when you've fighted out with tanks, as an example. And again, create more incentive towards flanking and maneuvering with your tanks rather than just, you know, lobbing them straight at the enemy. Because, I mean, in most cases, you're not going to be frightfully more rewarded for doing, you know, anything else than just going straight ahead, which is really a shame, and it's not really something I think the game developers, that is Relic, should be encouraging. Quite the opposite. But in many ways, whereas Companies 1 actually had several elements, for example, Stugs were rather tough to engage on, in particular for the Sherman tank. Stugs were pretty much suicide to attack head on here in the game. I mean, you just go straight ahead for a Stug and it's like a bunch of them, and again that sort of creates some I would say differences in how tank combat actually went in Companies 1 and Companies 2. That's not to say, of course, Companies 2 doesn't make some improvements, but I do feel like some things were also lost in translation between Companies 1 and Companies 2, and I do miss them. Also, some of the tanks somehow feel a bit lighter than in Companies 2. There's a certain feeling more of gravity and weight to some of the tanks in Companies 1 than in Companies 2. That's more sort of aesthetic and, you know, less tangible, I think, but there's certainly perhaps some room there to be done as well. But overall, just want more incentive towards maneuver and flanking. Let's just, you know, get a bunch of anti-tank and to shoot away. I mean, again, there needs to be sort of, you know, also a bit more force. I think, you know, do a bit more clever with the anti-tank guns rather than just, you know, get a bunch and sort of fire away. They shouldn't be useless, but, you know, they shouldn't be just, you know, the end of all things. So that's it for me today, I think. So thank you all for joining in. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope you agree with my thoughts. If you did, subscribe, like, share, comment. If you'd like me to do consider donating or pledging on Patreon. Helps me out a ton. Of course, allow me to keep making these videos, since, you know, this does take time. So do consider. Links in the video description. This is Imperial Link. Cheers. Thank you for watching. See you all tomorrow.